Hello. Thank you so much for everyone who's taken the time to come and hear us speak today. I'm Verity, Hambrook-Skinner. I do a job share with Sophie, which is quite niche, at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which is, for us, it's a labour of love for the sectors that we represent, which I'm sure all of you here today share that love for, given we're all here. Our role is we are head of campaigns, external affairs and strategic comms, and we've both been working in government communications probably for a terrifying combined 35 years. So we do feel like we know what we're doing these days. We're basically going to talk to you about how we are more and more trying to harness voices to really get our messaging across, and unusual voices, and sort of shifting the channels away from the traditional channels. But I think we're innovating constantly in this space, and we're having to innovate because we really want to actually talk to our audiences and talk to the people that we need to get our messages across to.
Okay, so why must government communication stay relevant? It's not just for government, it's happening to a lot of institutions that for years we've relied on, but trust is diminishing amongst the general public. And then aside from that, people are consuming their news in lots of rapidly changing ways. So I think everyone was very comfortable in understanding the rise in people obtaining their news from social media and so on, but increasingly it's coming out through other voices on social media, podcasts, and just an array of different platforms, and that's something that we have to keep a pace with. And then why do we communicate at all? It's quite different to a lot of the brands and so on that are here, so we have sort of statutory obligations that we have to communicate to people. That sets quite a high bar to make sure that we do reach our audiences. It can be really important issues around their welfare, and government exists to sort of help public services function and ultimately help people live happier, healthier lives.
So this is just one example where we use the voice of a local influencer. So this is Alex McCormick, and you guys will remember what happened in Liverpool and the recent riots, and obviously very sensitive and the strength of feeling around those riots. But really what we wanted to do was to provide that sort of reassurance at a local level, and when the library was burnt down, that really affected the community so much. And while obviously ministers were present and very involved, we really wanted to look to someone local who people would listen to and respect. And we got Vicky to reach out, and she young local residents in the area. And she did loads of stuff on her channels. Alex, sorry, not Vicky. She did loads of stuff on her channels, and it was really, really effective. And actually, for what we saw across all of our channels and across her channels, for an issue that obviously had a lot of negative sentiment, it was overwhelmingly positive. So it just made a huge difference being able to leverage her voice. And I think it's really about understanding, what communities need, who cares about that community, who can talk to that community, and you look at the audience, look at the demographics, and work out who your local influencers are. And we're really going to be looking to replicate this actually for some of the big campaigns we've got coming up. We've got a big sports participation campaign for children coming up, and that's going to be probably one of the most hyper-local things I've ever worked on. We're going to be running pilots across the country, so using those local voices, those local supporters is going to be absolutely critical, we think, to the success of that campaign. So one to watch. And so this just talks a bit more about why we're leveraging those voices, and I think it is about trust. And as Sophie said, it's so important that people trust the people they're listening to, and it builds that credibility for whatever we're trying to communicate, and about having that emotional connection, but also about reaching new audiences. And I'm sure there are so many of you in this room who are trying to crack a particular audience, and I think for government we are always trying to do that. There are so many hard to reach audiences, maybe because they're disengaged, maybe because they're genuinely really hard to reach, they're not consuming media in the way that we think that they are. So we're always just trying to really, really now drill down into audiences at a really hyper-local level. How are they getting their media? Is it online, or do they feel disconnected because there is a language barrier, for example? So it's just, as with everything, it's just really putting audience first, and I think that's something that we have done, but I think we're doing that now at a much more granular and really, really deep level, and then we're choosing our channels based entirely on those audiences. We've talked about relevance a bit as well, but I think it is really important that, that it's relevant. There are so many different ways now that people can consume media, so many different ways people can get their messaging, and we all know that we all do it in our own habits. Like anything that feels familiar, feels comfortable, that's probably where we're going to go to get our news and to get where our interests are and our hobbies are. So it's just about how can we make ourselves just that little bit more relevant.
So Verity's spoken about why we do it, and I'll do a bit on how we do it now. So we've had a lot of experience in working with micro-influencers. We like the budget of micro-influencers, but we also like the connection they have with their audience. And our experience from working with them is that bringing them in really early is really important in the process. And for the output to be truly authentic and to really resonate with their audience, we know that we have to blend with them on the actual product. And I think that for a long time, brands and governments have been very rigid about the application of brand guidelines. And I think that in this new way of working, we've found that going in from the outset and being able to bend with your influencer and know they have their red lines about what works for them and trying to be flexible is really where we create the most impact. And I think it really helps with the messaging as well as when it lands, which is we want the message to be heard in a way that people are comfortable with. And that's really important, that the authenticity of the influencer style comes through. And I'll give you an example here. We recently did a huge push, once in a generation lifetime, for young people across the country to contribute to an upcoming youth strategy. So we really wanted to hear what young people thought. And that's not that easy a task, really, for a central government department. We don't have big marketing budgets. And so how do we get this request out to young people? And so the obvious answer here was some influencers. Our primary audience was young people themselves. Secondary audience was parents and carers. And we found that we just had enormous success in terms of reach and then ultimate responses to the survey from doing this. It was supplemented by some in-person activity as well, which obviously would have contributed. But we far exceeded our KPIs, and we would never have been able to achieve this had we not selected the right influencers who delivered their messages in their authentic style and explained why the government wanted to hear from young people and what the impact might be.
So I think Sophie's touched on sort of budgets, and obviously that is a real consideration in anything that we're doing. We don't have massive marketing budgets at all. We have very, very little, and I would say a lot of what we do is no cost, low cost comms. So we really do try to bring on influencers and creators pro bono if we can, and that works for them. Obviously, if it doesn't work for them, that's absolutely fine. And I guess we have a sort of process, and now I think we've got quite experienced at how we can do that and how we can sort of bring on like ambassadors and then turn them into real advocates for the policy that we're trying to do. I think we've done this really well, particularly in the loneliness space. We've had a lot of big influencers behind that in the past because it's a really, really compelling issue. And I think in the sort of, after everyone will have seen adolescence, I think it's still a really, it's a really big problem, particularly for men from 16 to 24-year-olds. There's a lot of people are very ashamed to say that they're lonely. We have got a really interesting statistic when we were looking at this campaign that people are more likely to say they've got an STD than admit to feeling lonely. So it's a really tricky one to crack, but it's a really, really important one to crack. So having sort of advocates and ambassadors for that campaign was basically pretty much the central part of the campaign. So it's really about sort of knowing your ambassadors, who's interested in what, really getting to learn how people tick when you're going out to try and find these people to pitch to them. And then finding a sweet spot around like what would work for them and what would work for you. Another really surprising partnership that came out of the loneliness campaign was the partnership that we did with Tinder. So, I mean, I'm trying to say that to people in government when we were like, actually, we've got this like great pro bono like partnership worth millions of pounds with Tinder. What do you think? And everyone was like, what? How does that like work? And actually, it's because Tinder at that particular time were trying to go for a bit of a different focus. They wanted people to see it more as like somewhere where you could like meet people, as in like just friends, as well as potential people to date. So because they were trying to sort of push their brand down that way, it really worked for what we were trying to do in the loneliness space. And we had a really, really fantastic, really successful partnership campaign with them. But I said, yeah, so it's just sort of finding that sweet spot and really knowing what you're looking for and then knowing those people. And then when you've got it, like absolutely optimizing on that opportunity, there's definitely a bit of a value exchange in government. I think people, creators, you know, they get to come to number 10. We've done a lot of roundtables at number 10, and that obviously creates amazing content on their channels. So I think if you have got a value exchange as well, that's a really, really useful thinking about what are they going to get from this. And the other thing I think we did particularly around loneliness and online safety, on the online safety bill, when we were doing a lot of work around that, is bringing people in from the beginning. I think creators, like, I think it's naive to think they just want to like kind of come in, do some content, and then lose touch of the campaign. Actually, I think that's what a lot of people want to be brought on for the whole journey. They want to understand what the communication strategy is from the very beginning, what the objectives are, and then what does success look like, and have them along. So I think we've had to, as a government or as a team, we've had to really sort of be really clear on that and like share what our objectives are, and share what our, you know, what we think the direction of the campaign is, and all the different activations, and what the sort of longer term picture would look like if they got on board. And I think that's a really nice thought, because they want to see that they've been a real part of it, and they've actually had a real role in sort of bringing about meaningful change in people's lives, which is what we're trying to do in government the whole time. And I think that is really under that sort of like building understanding, what makes them tick, what they care about, and then how that sort of value exchange and how you can support each other is really important. That's it, really. So yeah, anyone got any questions for us at all? Other than why it's very hot, so yeah, probably not.
Yeah, it's very hot.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, hang on, someone's coming with a mic.
I just wondered, as a government department, are your agency relationships, is it all tendered, or do you do everything in-house, or do you have, you know, budgets for external support, or how does that work?
Yeah, we do. We do work with agencies. We do a lot of this in-house, and particularly, we've been talking largely today about the low and no cost work that we do. A lot of that is driven in-house, because it's not, you know, agencies we'll work with often will be delivering a sort of big campaign that's multifaceted, lots of different levels, creative production or whatever, of which influencer marketing is part. Whereas we've tried to embed this in everything that we do, and that is definitely the direction that we're going in. But for that, and mindful of taxpayers' money, and we work with lots of people that, you know, some of the examples we've given, they're people that really care about their communities, the people that they work with, and they want to communicate important messages. And obviously we enjoy working with them because they're the right people to deliver the message. So most of this stuff is delivered in-house. And it's, I think, the real, where really loads of the attention goes is identifying the right people. And that's, we put a lot of care and time into doing that, because as you all know, there's no point kind of putting out a sort of blanket request to millions of different people. We have to identify the right people, target them in the right way, bring them on board for a long-term relationship.
I think the other thing as well is we are, you know, I think we are now, when we're looking at ministers and their media and what they're doing, it's not just that they're meeting like the lobby and the normal journalists. We also are trying to facilitate them meeting creators when they go on visits and stuff like that. And it's really, that's been a really recent shift, but a really successful one actually, because obviously we know that like if that creator like has some time with that minister, not only do they actually really understand what's happening and what that minister's talking about and like what they're trying to do, we then see that messaging in like on so many different channels rather than just on the usual, still really important channels that like, but I think that's, you know, for me, and I've been working in digital comms and done a lot over the years, that feels like like a really refreshing and brilliant change, actually. It's really exciting.
Thank you for the nice presentation. How many influencers do you use per campaign? And do you use any technological platform to manage those campaigns in finding the influencers, running the campaign, gathering data about them?
So was the question, how many do we work with and how do we find them?
How many in average influencers do you use?
I think that's really hard to say, to be honest. I think there are campaigns that have been multi-year where we've worked with sort of 70. I think there's probably a question about who is an influencer in that, because government has always worked with influencers. We always want to partner with experts. You know, if an expert has 2 million followers, you know, I think that's quite hard to say, but ultimately I'd say in every activity that we do, it's really important that we always do sort of integrated comms. We wouldn't put out a press notice without thinking about online, and thinking about sort of partners and influencers is just front of mind for everything, but I think it would vary. But I mean, I suppose for campaigns, it depends what the objective is. With that youth campaign, we had such a specific target audience of people that, and obviously, that had a finite budget, so I think we had about 5 then. But it can be anything up to sort of 70 if it's multi-year. And then in terms of identifying them, I genuinely think our biggest success is keeping an eye on the wider world, who's saying what, making a sort of log of if you've seen an actor saying something that's relevant to our work, that then you can revisit that in a few months' time. We have a really good idea of what's going to be coming down the track, so we can always think quite strategically about working with them. We do have an online platform, but it doesn't always give the nuance that we need. And as I'm sure you'll be aware, we have, the scrutiny that's on the work that we do is extremely high. And so we have to be absolutely confident that we're working with the right people.
There's one more there, I think.
Hi there. How closely do you partner with the wider PR and marketing teams on this? Because I do very similar work to you in influencer, and I'm in PR, and I work with different teams at my company. So just be good to kind of get an idea on how you partner with other teams. And
yeah, I think we do work really closely. We've actually got a really small comms team at DCMS. There is a press team and a digi team. But I'd actually say there's been a really interesting shift recently where we probably would have done the content creator work and the influencer work alone, because that was more associated with like the low-cost campaigning. But now we are actually really having to pull together on it, because if the minister is out talking to media and stuff like that, we want them to be talking to creators. That involves a press team. And then a digi team now, because we're looking for so much, trying to do lots of stuff off channel, like off our own channels. That's really changing their work all the time as well. So I'd say now it's like really brought this like amazing sort of like line of collaboration through to our team, and there's only 45 of us at DCMS, so it's not that many for a government comms team. But yeah, I think we're having to work more closely than ever on it. And again, that's a really, there's nothing better than like collaboration. And I think, I've always been like, we should all be crossing disciplines in comms anyway. And we should all, and I love the fact that we can all work together and like trying to understand more about what each other's needs are in this space.
You've spoke a bit about how highly scrutinised you guys are with your budgets. I was just wondering, I work in an industry that has a very highly scrutinised budget also, and it's sometimes really tough to explain the power of influencers to a senior leadership team and the board. What are some of the more successful tactics you've discovered in securing that budget and proving the ROI of influencers in your specific area?
So I think it all comes back to insight and like having the data really. So I think understanding, being able, we now do so much like work on like research and focus groups and really understanding like the audiences and like where they're consuming stuff, not only like what they care about when it comes to a policy, but where are they going to read about that, get involved with it, engage with it. And I think if you've got that and you can say, like, this is where they're spending the most of their time, this is what they're doing, these are what their habits are, and then you present that as it to, we have to, everything that we do goes through the Cabinet Office when it's paid for, which we're really used to having to get budget signed off. And if you can back it up with data and with evidence, then I think that's the best way, really. ROI is quite a tricky one, obviously, but actually there are some really, there's some campaigns in government. Visit Britain use a lot of influencers, and their ROI on influencers is actually like more compelling than some of their other paid-for channels now. And if you ever look into it, I'm sure you'll be able to find some information on some of the campaign work they've done, because it's really fascinating. And just really, it makes a really compelling case now for this shift that we're all seeing on channels.
I think as well, when you look at, certainly when we would look at our owned and earned channels, we have a really good sense of who is receiving our messages. And for us, that youth campaign, we would not have been able to meet them. It's indisputable that we wouldn't have been able to meet them through owned and earned. I think as well, for us, we've been banging the drum for a long time, and I think the argument has been won, really, in terms of the legitimacy of it as a channel. And I think they're in sort of on a, trying to bring you with you, there's normally one or two people that are slightly more sympathetic to your argument, that I think in terms of trying to convince them your consistency of messaging and then bringing others in to also argue the same point, because you'll find millions of people in this conference alone that would be arguing the same point as you to try and get your point across.
I also think one of the things about audience as well is if you do spend a lot of time with a creator, there's no one that understands their audience better than that creator. And I think on that sort of like that long-term relationship bit, that's where it becomes such a value exchange as well, because they can just tell you so much, they give you so much insight to like what their audience say, how they feel, and like, not just what you see, but their understanding. So it's just really like, that just really respecting that their sort of experience with that audience, and using that and leveraging that is also just a really brilliant thing to do, and a brilliant thing that comes out of these relationships. What's one more question? Okay.
I think we're at time.
I'm sorry, we've run out of time. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, guys. We're on LinkedIn, so if anyone wants to get in touch, you can reach us there. But thanks very much.